Okay. Hey guys, welcome. How's it going? Welcome to the second Indy.js in this awesome new space. It's pretty exciting stuff. Thanks to Steven for making that happen. We're still figuring out some of the technical details, so bear with us. Also, new to this space, if you didn't know, we're doing a live stream. So if you can't make it physically, you should be able to make it digitally. If anybody is listening right now, hello and welcome. The camera's back there right now, so we can all wave at them if we want.
Hi, everybody.
There's probably nobody watching right now.
Tell your friends. Put it on Twitter.
So historically at Indy.js, we've always done intros where you say your name and where you're from and where you work and why you're here and that sort of thing. I think in a group this big, with so many disparate tables, it's not going to work out very well, but I want to try something new. So let's do this thing where I start a 2-minute timer and you introduce yourself to the people at your table. All right? I mean, you've probably already done that, but.
Church, right?
Yeah. Peace
Familiar with that. Give somebody a hug that you don't know. Make it strange.
Yeah. Make sure you hug everyone.
You're going for that? Yeah, it's a cool space. No problem. And eventually we get maybe this one's. We had some in other offices that do.
Yeah.
It's just
That's awesome.
So you're just gonna walk around. There's got to be a better way to manage what's being presented versus just pushing one screen over another. But I mean, it's really not that bad. If you look at it, it's
For now,
it's
it
pretty damn
depends on-
clear. Once you start walking at code and stuff, it's a little different. And that's kind of my measurement. If we're looking at code, let's go to code.
Yeah.
Otherwise, people are just chatting.
So what he did was he's got the second screen, which is the projector or whatever. He's just always doing that screen. So in theory, even if he goes to like a text editor, it'll still be on screen too.
As long as it has it on.
Okay, so the downside of this approach is you're probably already doing all those things.
Yeah, probably. Right.
All right.
We're going on 2 minutes.
28 seconds.
I'm gonna just do a quick synopsis of these badges for like
Fair enough. That's good. If you guys okay, time's up.
All right. I hope everyone knows everyone now.
So one downside to this approach, which somebody pointed out immediately, is you've probably already been talking at your table the whole time. So I'm going to have to think of a different way to handle this.
Hopefully musical chairs, something of that nature. Next time. So as Tony mentioned, I'm Steven. I work here at Salesforce. This is our new space. Please, you got a badge if you came in, make sure you return it. Otherwise, it's like $50 out of my pocket, and then we won't be able to use the space anymore. So, return your badges. If you're looking for restrooms, the ladies' restrooms is right up here when you come out to the left. The men's is a little further into the left, with a little pocket over there. If you get lost, just
Next to vending machine.
next to the vending machine, not the soda vending machine, the technical vending machine with
The tab crashed again. What a disaster. Everybody's looking at me. Cool. All right, guys. This is Anthony. He's going to talk about some cool JavaScript stuff. Thanks.
All right, so I guess so I'm here to talk about better state management, time travel debugging, and hot reloading with Redux and React. I guess how many people have used JavaScript in the past? Hey, just like show of hands. Okay, pretty good number. How many people have used React on anything? Also good. Anybody use Redux for things? Okay, so a slightly number. I think I'm talking mostly about Redux, assuming you know kind of some React and a decent amount of JavaScript, but there's not a whole lot of like code possibly. So let's see. Okay, so I guess how did I get interested in this? So I started at a startup in October, and we were doing a lot of kind of stuff with like Flux and JavaScript kind of things. And so we had kind of an existing app that was using a couple different kind of patterns that was kind of like home rolled, and we were kind of saying maybe there are some different alternatives that we'd like to evaluate for like future projects. So we had a little app that we wanted to make. It's called onboarding. So it was a way for our so I work for a healthcare company. So kind of people who are signing up to be like our members, basically they can go in and kind of register and make sure that all their information is correct, like their dependents are correct, all these kind of things, just so that we can kind of more quickly onboard them into our process. So I was kind of interested in this, and it seemed like we're trying to experiment with technologies, and Redux seemed really cool. So we figured we'd try it out. So I will show you kind of the basics of the app here. This is like more than a to-do app kind of thing, right? It's a little more advanced, but just kind of so you kind of have a just a quick page here. You can get started. So this is all with Material UI, which is like based on Google. So if you have a Google Android kind of thing, this will probably seem really familiar. So you can put in, and who knows if this will work, but live demos, right? So if I was, born in 1900, so I'm assuming that I'm somebody who is with this employer. So I can just say, yep, it's me, and hopefully it should log me in. Cool. So it'll load my information. So basically, just pulled back all this kind of information that I put in previously, so you can fill out the different fields. One thing that's kind of interesting is if you kind of delete this and tab over, it'll. No, maybe not. Yeah, so there it is, an error that kind of happened asynchronously. So I have to probably put that back in, I guess. So this is all hitting Salesforce. There is no database. So basically, as soon as I'm updating a field here, it's writing to the server, or sending information to the server directly updating in Salesforce. So Salesforce is kind of our backend, and this is like running with a Sinatra server, which is a Ruby thing. It's kind of similar to Express on the back end. So I have a dependent baby Panozzo, and it's a female apparently because of the color here. If you kind of change one to the other, it'll kind of change colors or just be asexual. And then your healthcare preferences. So there's kind of a bunch of checkboxes, and then you can do something here where if you reject or accept, it'll kind of show this kind of thing. So this is basically all on the front end right now. It's all a single page application. It's all just kind of letting you go through this, and then at the end you're kind of done. So this is the application that we built. It probably took a couple of months all told, I guess, but just because we were changing requirements, doing different kind of things back and forth. So we'll come back to this at some point, just kind of like dig into how is it actually working for some things. Sorry, that's a bit much. Okay, so wanted to talk about Redux. So it's a predictable state container for JavaScript apps. This is all from the kind of intro to this framework thing. So basically, one of the things that it's trying to do is help you kind of manage state inside of your apps, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And one of the things that I really like about it is it helps you do a lot of good developer kind of experience kind of things. Like it'll do hot reloading, and you can do time travel debugging of your kind of app as you're doing it. You don't have to use React. You can use other kind of view libraries. I've actually seen it where somebody has like a command line, like terminal program that uses Redux as the thing, and then just kind of re-renders the state and all this kind of stuff. And it's also very small, and it's not really changing all that much, I feel like. So it's kind of a good thing, I think, to build on. It's like an aspect of your app. So I kind of mentioned managing state. So if you have a single page application, there's a lot of things that may be difficult. So if you have like multiple pages or tabs, but they all have kind of the same data, like let's say you show like, if I update on one page my user's email address, does it update throughout my app? Like what things are actually pointing at that? So like making sure that, I don't have to constantly reload data from the server or do certain things like that. If I have an asynchronous request, like, I might initiate that and then I just kind of wait for a while. Maybe I show a spinner, maybe I don't. So there's kind of like a lot of states of what this network transaction could be in. So kind of like, how do we represent that from a UI perspective or from a state perspective? Like what state is it in, essentially? You might have some fields in your form that we haven't actually saved yet because you're just typing in there, but we haven't, either press the save button or blur the field. So, it hasn't done that yet. It'd be nice to do something like a undo if you like send an email that's, not good or something like that. Or, if you want to like go back to where you previously were. But how can you typically do that in an application? With Redux, it's very easy, but and there's actually like a plugin that you can install that just does it in a few lines of code if your data is set up correctly. And then, it's kind of like, when do we actually need this data? Can we fetch it opportunistically? How do we know when to fetch that or when to refresh it? That sort of thing. So it's kind of a lot of information there. So Redux has 3 principles. So first is that there is a single source of truth. I'll pull this. Sorry about that. There we go. So you have a single source of truth. State is read-only. So basically, you can't really mutate the state that is actually in the store. So you have one store that has all of your information, all of your state about your application, and then you have basically it cannot be mutated by anything except for actions, which are fired by your app in certain ways. And then there are certain things called reducers, which will take these actions and kind of actually make the changes to the state. So I'll kind of go into detail for these different things. So in some Flux patterns, there are multiple stores, right? And you have kind of data over here, and you have your user store, and you have your provider store, and you have your post store, all these kind of things. In Redux, there is only one store, and it's just one like object or hash. That's kind of where you store all of your information. So what you might do is you say store.getState, and then it'll return, let's say this is a to-do app. It might show you that there's a visibility filter that's on, and then just kind of your list of to-dos. One has consider using Redux, which is completed, and then keep all state in a single tree, which is not yet completed, apparently. So this is kind of like everything we might need to know about our application. Now, I think this is probably a subset of what you would actually need, but it kind of gives you the idea. So whenever we update the store, all of our views will kind of look back and say, okay, what changed in the store? How do I need to update? I am probably the least clear on this point of like how this actually works. Like, it feels like magic. You kind of just update something in the store and it appears to work most of the time. So, but there's different ways of kind of passing the store through your different React views. Typically what I've done is kind of having a like provider, which is like a special React Redux like component, and then that will keep the store instance, and then other components can look into that and just kind of say like they will just know about the store. Essentially, it'll get passed down through the props or through different kind of things. And kind of an example of this that I just talked about was kind of, you have a provider, it has the store, it's passed in here, and then your app is all inside of here. So everything inside of your app will know about the store. So there's only one store, that's all you need to know about, kind of thing. So I guess, does anybody have any questions about the store so far? Okay. So the next component is actions. So actions are what your app needs to send to change the state through the reducers. So the simplest action, or one of the simplest actions, is basically you say store.dispatch. So that's saying I want to fire an action. And its type is complete to do. So every action must have a type when it's done. And then this is like an extra parameter, which is index is 1. So it's saying I want to complete the first to do that I have. Basically, every action should be an object and have a value of type, which is whatever its type it is. So if you want to complicate that a little bit more, which is something that I do, which is, that's what I do, I complicate things. You can make a constant, which is complete to do, to make this, basically it's equivalent to this string. And then you can, if you ever have a typo in here, you'll know it because it'll complain that this variable is undefined or whatever. So your app won't start up, so you'll kind of catch it quicker than if you say, like, if you have a typo in here and you don't realize it for a day or something like that. And then another thing that I've done is kind of action creators. So instead of kind of hand rolling this each time that we do this, we have a special function which is just says complete to do with the index, and then it returns a hash that has kind of this constant and then whatever index that we want to pass into it. So it might seem like kind of overcomplicated, but it's just kind of a consistent way of creating actions. Change the signature, maybe we want to change this, the places that we're using this are. And some people, so one of the things that we do throughout the calls, right? So anytime I want to add a dependent, I have a AJAX request up there, and then I wait for it to come back. So typically, for every in progress, a success, and a failure. So instead, for each like constant that we might need to do, I kind of created a helper that would just kind of say, okay, for each one of these kind of constants, make 3 different types. So there are a couple different things in the app that they suggest using, like switch statements and stuff for like large blocks of things, and there may be other syntactic ways to do it to kind of make it cleaner or appear better, that sort of thing. So okay, so the kind of last component here of actions is you can also return a thunk, which is like a function that returns a function, or so a thunk is a function that returns a function, which is like blow your mind kind of thing, right? But basically, it'll return a function whose end goal then is to maybe fire more actions or do other kind of things. This is kind of what allows us to actually like execute certain asynchronous actions. So I'll give an example here. So you kind of saw where I updated the dependent, with the information in there. So name, I think, is the name of the field. Value is what value it has now. ID, I don't remember. I think maybe it's the ID of the dependent. And so what it will return here is a new function that will take in the dispatcher, which is the thing that lets you say, dispatch this action. So it allows you to kind of like fire more actions essentially. And then get state, which is kind of like the global state of the application, I believe. And then given that I have a token, so we're using JWT way to kind of say, I've logged in, and the way that I logged in was I sent a request to the server, and they sent me back a thing that says, yep, you're valid. Here's a token that will allow you to communicate with me in the future, kind of using like cryptography and things like that. So then basically, send a patch method to this this URI, and then send certain fields, pass our token. We're not going to cache the value that, because we had an issue with like IE9 or something like that, which was like trying to cache, and that was unfortunate. And then finally, at the end, either there's some sort of authentication failure, in which case with that, or we dispatch 1 of 2 actions. Either, okay, one thing I did miss, I'm sorry, was that right when we first start updating the dependent, we dispatch to say that there's an update dependent in progress. Okay, so that way we can like do a spinner, we can kind of blur the view, whatever we need to do to kind of say, hey, this thing is happening. And then later, when we actually return from this, either with an error or with a success, then we can kind of say, hey, we're not updating anymore. We know the status of this is resolved, either in a failure or a success. So this is a way to take actions and actually have them do more than just return a hash. There are so the way that the thunks work is this is through, Redux has like a middleware layer. So this is a way of kind of saying, I want to add new functionality onto Redux without having to add it to the entire like Redux code base. So that's how like Redux stays really small, is like you have like certain middlewares that you can plug in, and you can write your own middlewares and things like that to kind of like do some processing of like different actions or different aspects of the thing. So, all right, so we had the store, we had actions, and now we have reducers. So reducer is given, if I get a certain action, how do I know what to do with it? How do I know how to update the store accordingly? So the signature of these is basically you have a current state, which is whatever subtree of the state that you have, and then you have whatever action that you get, and then all you do is just return the new state. Okay, so we'll give some examples of that in a little bit. So one critical thing is it must not modify the current state or have any side effects. So you shouldn't have any network calls in your reducers. You shouldn't actually change the state. You should return a new version of that same state. Yeah, so we'll cover that in a second, I guess. So if say we had the following state subtree, okay? We have to-dos and we have a list of to-dos, okay? And that if we have, the current state and the action, so this is the current state essentially, and we want to add a new to-do that's like this, then I guess like how do we kind of like tell it to return the right thing to kind of to update this? So kind of the way that I'm thinking about it is I want to take the current to-dos and just kind of add a new one to it, right? Reducer, this is the to-dos reducer. The initial state of it is empty array. So if we didn't have any to-dos already, it would just kind of say, okay, pretend you just have an empty array. And then whatever action that we pass in, I think in this case, it's the add to-do with text of to-do 3. So then in your reducer, there'll be a switch on whatever kind of type it is. Like I said, some people get kind of turned off with the switch statement, but there are ways to kind of work around that. And then, so if we have an add to do type of action that we're getting here, we want to return a new array which has, so this is an ES6 construct that says just take the values of whatever array that this is, like the ... It's kind of like Ruby splat if you're familiar with that. Just says expand out whatever values are in here, and then the next thing is we want to push on another another action, which is the new action. So and we'll say completed false just because if we have a new action, we probably, or a new to-do item, we probably wouldn't want to add that on there. So this is like probably one of the densest slides. So so one last thing here is, so to-dos is one reducer, but we may have tens or hundreds of reducers throughout the app to kind of say that certain subtrees of the state should be manipulated by this. So the way that Redux handles that is there is a combine reducers function. Right now we're only using the to-dos. So this is another ES6 thing which basically is like the to-dos function should map to this to-dos like key essentially in the state. So if we had like a user reducer, we might say user, and then we would have another like key off of here that is user instead, that has the user's information. And then given that we have all the reducers for the entire app, then we can create a store which uses that reducer, and that's kind of how it does it. That's kind of how it reduces actions to change the state. So I guess thoughts, questions. I feel like I just hit like a bunch of stuff there. Let's take a sip. What's up?
Looks like you might have overlapping. Should you write overlapping reducers? Like if you have nested to-dos, it's like a more complicated structure, or is that bad?
So are you saying like multiple things updating the to-dos subtree of the state?
Yeah. So let's say to-dos was like 2 levels deep, and it's like, apps.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think typically I would only have, it's kind of like a one-to-one mapping usually. Different actions. You can have the same action. You can have multiple reducers respond to the same action. So you could have like, maybe your to-dos tree updates and your like number of times I've hit the network updates or something like that if you're doing something like that. At least that's how I personally have done it. There may be ways to do that, or like maybe there are good times to do that. I think one of the things that they try to emphasize also is that try to denormalize like your things and like only have one reference if possible. So like instead of I have three duplicate lists of these to-dos, I would just have like maybe 3 lists, and they all point with IDs to like a kind of like a like super list, like the actual true list. I don't know if that makes sense or not. So it's a good question.
So when Redux calls this function,
Mm-hmm.
or let me start over. When Redux is doing a data transformation through reducers, does it call every reducer and say, here's the action? Or does it only call the one that is mapping to the part?
I believe so. I believe it calls it for all of them. And typically what they're going to do is just, since it doesn't impact them, they're just going to return whatever they already had. And then only in the ones that it actually has to transform will it kind of redo it. Because I think the default is if it doesn't match any of these switches, the default at the bottom here is like return state. Right? Okay. So it just kind of is a pass-through. If it doesn't match any of those switches, then it'll just kind of pass through and return what it typically would have. So kind of one other example in the kind of same vein, if we wanted to complete a to-do, one of the things that we could do would be to like loop through all the to-dos that we currently have and then, you know, find the one whose index matches the one that we're trying to pass in and then just mark it as completed. So we're going to say object that assign new object and then whatever the existing parameters are and then set the completed to true. So we're, I don't know, this is kind of all ES6 or a lot of ES6 kind of things in here, I feel like, but ES6 is like the ECMAScript 6, so it's like kind of the newer version of JavaScript. And I guess there's probably ES7 now, right? So maybe it's not that new, but there are some like syntactic kind of components to it, which are nice. So, and I kind of mentioned how you can kind of reduce the switch cases. So I created like a function which is, you know, it's called create reducer, and it kind of does some mapping of to say. Instead of the switch statement, all we have now is action types, whatever this thing is, and then it'll either get the state or it'll get the state and some other parameters, and then you can kind of return certain things. So it's a lot shorter than if we were to write it in the, you know, kind of that format or that format. So not strictly needed, but maybe it's good. Okay, so we've covered stores, actions, and reducers. I guess one more question. Yeah. Yeah, sure. This guy? Yeah, I did. So yeah, we can talk about that. Let's see. Let's see where that would be. So this is the actual app, so we can dive in because I think we're gonna do that. So I have into like a utils function. So I think it's in here.
More specifically, that second order argument.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm kind of losing my. You're saying maybe like taking a step back to this one, or? Yep. So looks like, so null, I believe, is kind of the initial state. Okay, so you guys see that okay? Okay. So yeah, so null apparently is the initial state. Reducer map is a kind of set of different kind of reducers. So let me take a look at this. This is like super dense. So it looks like my thing keeps crashing or something. This is really weird. Oh, I guess I could. Okay. So it looks like, so the initial state here is going to be like an empty array of this like subtree, which is called reducers, and then, or dependents, sorry. And then for each of these things, we're basically saying create a new function or a new item in our reducer map. So that way, when we call into that, instead of using the switch statement, we'll just kind of use a hash lookup essentially to say, okay, if I get this this action type, then I'm going to use this function, which function in this case is take in the state, and there's some extra parameters of dependence, and then just return those dependents essentially as far as our new. So this is why when we try to fetch the dependents from the server, it'll return us a list, and we just say, okay, our new dependents are this list. kind of the same way here. If we get a failure, we're gonna disregard the state or whatever returns and just kind of say it's empty array. I guess if we update a dependent, one thing we're gonna do here is like, so we have an ID of the dependent, what the name of the key is, which is a really awkwardly named thing, and then what the new value of that is. So like, let's say we update their date of birth at the server, we'll get a response back which says, yep, worked. And then, so we'll say, okay, cool. Now we want to go through the keys or we want to go through the dependents and say like, which one of those matches the one that we just believe we updated and actually update their value internally. So, does that help?
Yeah.
Cool. At times I feel like it's almost too dense for its own good, some of the things that I did, so shame on me. But it kind of looks nice as well. It's like, it's a lot better than writing out super long certain things. So there's also a function create constants, which I think I kind of showed a little bit about. Let's see, so I guess maybe going back to the app real quick. Knows where that is at now. Let's see. Okay, so you kind of saw this, and maybe we'll go to this page. So what's happening behind the scenes here is that this is Control H. This is a command that you can use when you have the Redux dev tools. So these are all the actions that have happened since we loaded the page, which just happened really quickly. So you have the kind of the init action, which is basically saying, set up all of these things in the current, like, this is kind of like the initial view of the world, right? Like, set up the state in this. So at every time you fire an action and do certain things, it'll record what was the state when that happened. And then what were in the case of all the other actions, it'll say what was the action that happened. And so this is kind of a way of kind of seeing what happens throughout your app lifecycle. So you can kind of debug, okay, this isn't firing because this thing over here isn't quite right, or this action doesn't have the right parameter, or this reducer isn't working correctly, that sort of thing. So init is kind of a special one in that this is like the initial state of your app. Future ones are all actions. So in this case, so Redux local storage is a wrapper or a middleware or something that basically allows you to serialize certain subsections of the state to local storage so that you can kind of persist it between requests or certain things. So in this case, we're using it to store our token so that if I come back or if I reload the page or whatever, that it'll still know that I'm logged in. And so we can dig into that a little bit. And then, so we get a React router. So that's another component that we're using here. We're saying that the router did change. So anything that really changes in your app that you want to care about or that you care about, I think should be in your like global like state. I think there are definitely differing opinions of, should you put it in a local component state or should you put it in like the global state? And I think that's a valid argument / conversation to have. So we get down to here, fetch user in progress. I apparently tried to do that. And then different kind of fetching of things. So one kind of cool thing here, so like if I type in testing, so Redux form is another kind of plugin that we're using here. And this is saying for every form element that we have, we want to kind of put it in some sort of component of the state. So if you dig in here, we have form. Well, apparently I just blurred it, so it added that. So we have all the different forms that we have here. Which one are we in? Authentication. So right now it's not validating anything. It's not submitting. The submit didn't fail, and we have some information about some different components on here. Now let's see. That should be. I think I did this in the past, so I have already user information here. Okay, so I think that's kind of a handy tool to kind of like say like what is actually going on in my app. How can I like debug certain things? There's another aspect. Hopefully it didn't go away. I think it probably did. Oh, no. Well, anyway, let's try this. Okay. Okay, so cool, not going away. So we can update actually our views and change them in line, and they will update automatically, which is might not seem that crazy, but I will show you how it's crazy in a second. So let's see. So this is a view. Well, we can dig into this in a bit. Okay, so instead of look up your information, we'll say look up your information. I'm really excited. So I wrote that file, and then it should update this. Oh, wait, I'm not on the right page. Try it again. Cool. So it did that. So it didn't hit the server again. It didn't do anything to do that. One kind of really cool thing I think is like, let's say I typed in testing. So we know that we have all these actions, right? So if I update this field again, if I update this thing, it will keep our existing it'll keep our existing form values, because what it's doing is whenever I reload the entire app, it'll replay through all the actions that it's done, and then it'll kind of say, okay, you typed in TESTING in this field, and then it'll be able to kind of restore that to where it was. So if I'm on date of birth here, I decide to change it to DOB, even though I'm focused on this field, it'll change it and be updated and keep my kind of existing state. So I think it's really helpful for if you're trying to kind of work through, okay, how do I do this view, change this view around to be what it is. I was sitting with our marketing person, and we're kind of wordsmithing certain things, and I would be updating, she would say, oh, what about this? And I would type it, save the file, and it would within a second update, right? So we were able to really quickly iterate on, what were we trying to kind of to do here? What about this? If this field moves above this other one, what will happen? Sort of thing, and you don't have to kind of redo all of what you're doing or reload the page or whatever, which can be multiple seconds easily. So I guess the other aspect is that, say you change something else, it'll always run through all those different actions, and then so if you change your app logic, it'll actually kind of change how that works. One other thing here in the sidebar here is you can commit your changes. So you can basically, it's like git commit. So you say, okay, I'm gonna save where I'm at right now. I really want this testing. That's really important to me. So you commit that. So now the new init state is kind of whatever is already in the app. So then I can go to date of birth and I can say 1/7. Oh, I messed it up. I want to revert it. Okay, so I go back here and I press revert. I guess imagine if you had a form that had 20 values and that it triggered when you did this certain thing. Then maybe it's helpful to kind of almost have a save point while you're manipulating this to kind of get it back to a known state so that you can kind of play around with it. So I will say maybe at this point that this app may have not been the best choice for Redux because I feel like it is super simple relative to what it can do. So I feel like if you had all these pages or multiple panes that were each referencing each other and doing certain things like that, it might be more of a use case. I think personally I've learned a lot, and I think it was valuable, and I think we would use it on future projects for sure. But this particular app is like a form wizard kind of thing, right? It's like maybe we overcomplicated this. So that is a consideration to take into account. But here we are presenting, right? So living the dream, as Kyle would say. So let's see, I guess. I think we talked about a lot of the things the different, there's thunk, right? We talked about that. Yeah, so at the high level, so one of the things we used was a bootstrapper to make all these folders and kind of hook everything up, because I tried it and it took me many hours and I was failing. So there are different open source repos that you can just basically clone and install, and then you'll have something set up that has Webpack and all these other kind of things already configured correctly. And I definitely highly recommend that. We were kind of worried that it was going to be we would get ourselves in a situation where something was broken, we didn't know how to fix it, but I feel like that didn't really happen. So that's kind of end of one, but so we kind of store different components. These are just kind of standard React views. So I don't know. I guess what else? So yeah, Okay, so I just don't know how like deep we want to get into like the code.
So I have a specific question.
Yeah, sure.
So earlier when you were talking about reducers, there was an action that was like complete to do, and you were updating the store to say that that to do was completed. Earlier you said that reducers should not have network activity. So was the network activity before that action or after that action? Like is complete to do the thing that says make the network call? Or
Yeah.
how does network interaction work with this?
So I would say generally it's going to be in an action, and then it could be in a certain portion of that action. So so for this one, this is the add dependent action creator. And so first we're going to dispatch that there is something happening, and then we're going to actually make this network request. And then the thunk handler is what we'll say, hey, since you're returning a function, I actually need to evaluate that in line, essentially. Like typically your action is just a simple hash or an object that has the type and then whatever other things you need. So this is a little more complicated. Complicated. So, and then at the end, you'll just kind of say dispatch the success or failure of that. Do you feel like that answered? And so the reducer is not doing any sort of network thing. It's basically just saying, given this action, I'm going to make a new state given my old state, right? So it's a pure function. One of the nice things is that they're really easy to test or can be tested. So if we go to, let's see. Okay, so here's our actual reducer. I didn't test all this, I don't think, so I kind of got bored. So for the post authentication, when it's in progress, it should set the submitting field to true, is what this thing should do, right? So, and it says whatever the current state is, and then it just says submitting to true. And the way that we do that is we can create a store locally that uses what I did was I used the reducer of the entire app just because it was so small. You might choose to subtree that down or whatever. And then you can dispatch an action, like this specific action is the one that we're testing. And then you can say, I want to see what the authentication of the state is essentially. And then this should be, we want to expect that the submitting is true. So, and then you can run these on the command line. They're super fast. Let's see. Takes super long to load up, but then when it actually runs, it's like 0.6 seconds or something, or 0.0006 or something. So here are the different like tests that we're running, and most of these are the reducers. So, and then there's kind of more things that are like that. So these are nice and easy to test. You can test like the different action creators very easily because most of those are either returning, a simple hash or maybe a function, which when you invoke it, it'll call like a network request or something like that. So you could test that if you wanted to. Kind of have like a Redux router is very similar to React router in that it basically said we want to fulfill the same contract. So if you're familiar with that at all, it's almost the exact same thing. Except now I think the routing information lives in the store somewhere in the state. So right here we have router. So right now we're on the authenticate page, it looks like. So it looks like we're at params location. There we go. So it'll tell us our current path name, and then if we were to change to go like previous or something like that, we'll see it change, I think, here. Yeah, so router did change is the action that gets fired. This happens when you pull in Redux React router. It just kind of happens automatically. And you basically will just mount this new reducer that you can import, and then it'll kind of just do all that automatically for you. And then now the router is different. That's welcome. So, and you can see that the payload that it sent was basically what is the new location, it seems like. So yeah, okay. So one of the things that we did was we wanted to send people like a magic link that had their onboarding ID, their employer ID already in there. So what we did was we, if you send it with question mark onboarding ID equals whatever, it'll create a hidden field on the form and write that automatically and then hide that field. So you don't have to deal with that. So it's kind of like one less thing for people to mess up if they're typing these kind of things in. So yeah. So anyway, just to rehash, we use Sinatra, React Views, Redux, kind of cover all these other kind of things, I think. So generally, when I was thinking about like how do you kind of make a new thing, I think one thing that's important to get right is like how do you set up the state so that your app can read it and use it easily, and there's not a lot of duplication. So just kind of thinking about that, like how do you set it up correctly? If you want to be able to undo something and redo it, you have to think about, okay, like how do I make something that has a past and a future and all these kind of things, aspects to it. Just kind of think about the different actions that you can do, like what buttons will you be able to press and things like that. And then, just kind of stub out the views with React. That's pretty, it's a good way to like prototype it almost and say like, here's what it'll look like. And then, you kind of make your actions, hook those up, and then make sure that they fire correctly by using that little DevTools Explorer kind of thing. And then just kind of actually make the reducers, which it's at that point, it's a lot easier because you kind of have, here's what my action is, here's what I need to do with my state, and it all kind of like works out pretty well. So I did not do this project very justice in my opinion. There is so much excellent documentation. The creator, Dan Abramoff, I think, right? He made like basically what is a free ebook at this website. And there's tons of examples in the book, and I call it a book, but it's really just the documentation. Like there's one thing where he's talking about like, here are the different ways to do async actions, and here's like 10 examples or 7 examples, and like by the end you're just like, wow, this is insane. Like, why did he go to this level of detail? But it's like kind of like walking you through like, here's the simplest thing, here's like how it can be more complex and more complex. And then he did like 30 free videos on egghead.io, which I guess is like a screen casting kind of website. He has a very like heavy Russian accent, so it may be kind of hard to understand, but overall pretty good. And then I talked about the bootstrappers. Here's the ones that I specifically used. And then this is an awesome blog post. It's like literally the best online tutorial ever. Like it is so long and awesome. It's just like incredible. So even if you don't want to use Redux, just check it out. It's like how every tutorial should be, like, not maybe everyone, but like if you're trying to learn something, like this is excellent. So, and that's about all I got. So I guess if anybody has any other questions or wants to see anything else, or
yeah, about how do you bundle up your users? I've tried Redux, and that's the number one thing I was confused by. Along with what you mentioned before, is how the components auto update when the store updates, it's just magic, great. Reducers together and use that in your app.
that makes sense. It's taking me a minute. It's been a few months since I had looked at this code base. So,
So
I was thinking that. Oh, there it is. Didn't see it. So, but generally, we have all of our different reducers in different files, and so we kind of are just importing those essentially. And then we have a root reducer, which is combining all of these reducers. So this format here is just kind of ES6 magic for dependence. Is dependence. So it's just kind of a short way of saying that. So we're setting up our dependence subtree, our form subtree, requests, router, Salesforce, token, UI, and user subtrees of the state. and those reducers. And then we're basically just exporting that root reducer to be used in the store.
So each one of those files that you're importing from the root reducer is going to export a user function?
I believe so. It's probably not this one. Okay. Yeah, so okay, the user one will it's going to export as default a new create reducer helper function that we kind of made with these parameters. So it's gonna basically it'll return a function that has a huge switch statement in it that has these values basically. So and then you kind of roll that up with the combined reducers to kind of get all the different parts of the state. Some of the form ones are super simple because they're just using whatever Redux form does, but then there are other ones that are a little more complex, depending on what kind of network requests or other kind of things that are happening. In this case, there's a way if you try to sign up or if you try to log in, but we don't recognize you, you can actually create a new person, but that's like kind of a little bit different of a UI concern. So we just kind of like flag that as a certain thing. So there's like a UI constants thing. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool. So
Talk a little bit more about form validation. I've seen some form error things in there.
Okay.
You're taking care of any of that as you?
Oh yeah.
State engine and then airing out.
Yeah, we saw like a failed it's a state on the users, right? We saw that we're messing with like underscore failed.
Yeah, I think that was there's kind of like in Redux form, at least the version that we were using as of 3 months ago, which is probably like way out of date now, based on how quickly they update things. There was like an internal function that if you like set the underscore error to whatever, it would like kind of set the error like aspect of the form correctly or something like that. So I think I can't remember what uses this. Is this the this is probably that one form that we had. So I don't think it's authenticated. I think it's okay. Yeah. So in our Fi information view, which is that one that you saw the error from, it'll pull this validator in, and then it appears that in the Redux form, there's just a way to pass what is a validator for your form, and then if it fails, it'll render whatever those errors are.
Pass or fail a function, and then it's going to go through with different, so that your state still stays the same of what it previously was before an error, and you take it, you set. Says this one has an error.
Yeah, I think that's right. If I can. Okay. All right, so the last action that we got was an update user failure, and the field that it was on was last name, and the error is called please fill out this field. And the way that we got that, I think, is something must have fired that. And then if we look on the form here, let's see, verification. So now we're currently in the verification form, and each of the fields that is on this page is in here somewhere. So we're looking for last name. Here it is. So the initial value, I don't think that's quite right. I'm not sure why that is. I think we disregarded that. It may have been a bug. I think so. Now the current value is quote quote, and the submit error is please fill out this field. So that's what happens when you set the underscore error on some kind of on like a field essentially. And then touched is just you have touched it at some point during this page load, so that you can kind of like do certain validations based on whether they have actually modified the field or not. So like similar might be like if it's like a dirty field or whatever, that kind of thing. So,
That's a feature of Redux form.
this is a Redux form, yeah. So it's nice to not have to like do all that and just kind of like have it do that. Although I think, like I said, since we were kind of digging into like some like undocumented things, it's probably A, gotten better, and B, it's kind of, yeah, I don't know if we should have done that, but I guess it worked. So yeah, hey, you had a question, sorry.
So I think the organization we're for is like trying to make a decision right now. We're keeping our state in like a global state object, which is sort of the same thing, but I think we're avoiding making decisions for Flux, Redux, or like MobX.
Okay.
I think we're leaning towards MobX because it's supposed to be just like really simple. It's supposed to like kind of omit like the reducers and so on.
What was it?
MobX.
Okay.
It's I just showed them like maybe last week or so. Another developer brought it up, and so I'm not sure about it. So, but I think you said use Flux before.
I have not used a ton of Flux. I think probably other people have better and/or more informed opinions, probably.
I was curious, did you find that this solved anything different between Flux and Redux?
So I guess I can talk to maybe just aspects of like how they might be different, and then like maybe other people can kind of chime in on if they've used one or both. I think one aspect is that you don't really have like a central dispatcher per se in Redux. Like you basically just call the dispatch method on the store, and then it kind of does the rest. So there's not, I think, I'm glad I put the slide in here in the appendix. So this is Flux. You have a dispatcher, and whatever's in your store will populate your view, and then eventually through actions they'll go to the dispatcher, and then they'll update the store. Right? This is kind of the Flux loop. I think there's not really this dispatcher anymore. I think it goes just straight to the store. So I think there's one less thing to kind of like be in the middle, in the mix there, So I think that it is slightly simpler in that sense. I think beyond that, I can't remember other things, but I guess maybe like, do other people have opinions on that?
You mentioned earlier that most Flux implementations include several stores.
Yeah, that's true.
Things that, like, I've been using Army for a long time. I have like 13 or 14 stores in my app.
Yeah, I guess we have a different app that's using Flux, and I feel like it's kind of hard to remember like where is this at in the store, and like I need to update this over here, and it's actually in 3 different locations and stuff. So maybe part of that could have been done with better like kind of conventions on the project versus like actually like technology or whatever. But I think it's nice to kind of have that kind of like constraint in place, I guess. So. Question or other thought on this topic? Okay, I think you had a question. Oh, sorry.
You flip back to the validators.
Yeah, sure.
So you've got your fields all listed here.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, looking at it, one of the questions I have is, is the code here kind of tightly coupled to your view now? And you need to add a new validation, you have to like, change some of this code that you've already written.
That's interesting. I'm thinking. It's been a little while.
Can you just create a new value function for that context?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is only for, so this is validators for the verification page only, I guess. So it should be only like the fields that are on here. I guess if we wanted to add a new validation, I was just trying to put it in one place essentially versus kind of like spread out through the verify information view or different kind of things like that. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. So any question?
There's a fun thing created, like I think it was for creating a user, and it was just like dispatch creating a user in progress first, and then
Right.
How would you handle it?
Sorry, truck or car.
How would you handle multiple requests? I mean, the first action dispatch was like, just to know that request is in progress. Probably use that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, like if you get something, just like something. Yeah. dispatch multiple actions, or you disable it?
Yeah, I mean, so you could potentially use like a promise library and kind of say like do all these things at the same time, and then kind of like depending on the result of them, you know, you do certain things. You could maybe fire off like another action, which is like a special action that does a different one or something like that. I'm not sure. I guess I'd probably go the promise route if I was doing like multiple asynchronous things at the same time. Or,
What if it's the same request?
so like, can you give me an example? Sorry.
Say, I go from page 1 to,
Okay.
like, you click page 1, then you click page 2, right?
Mhm.
It goes to page 2, you dispatch that you're getting new data, so dispatch like in progress action. Just in the request can get, like, keep clicking next. You know, like dispatch.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, actually, I think we did have a little bit of an issue with that, where it's like, say you update something, and then you just quickly, rapidly click back and forth. Like, it's kind of like whatever ends up with last is, yeah, that would be, I think that'd probably be a good way of handling it at that point. So, yeah, that's a good question.
You can make your UI completely dependent on the statements in your store. Like you say, it's been clicked, so now it's like it's got some new processing state.
What if you don't want it to say?
Well,
Probably just support whatever.
Yeah.
You were saying like the an example of like clicking next. So if you like if you're on page 1 and move to page 2, you click next 3 times before the page has a chance to go to the next page. Now it's assuming page 5 or something.
Yeah, so if you
You
were
were
to
saying
made a request to the.
Oh,
Give you an example of this. So, okay, yes. And we may have fixed this, I don't know.
I think we should just optimistic now.
Oh, okay. It was a problem for a while because we basically would just fire off things, and then so right now it's yes. So I guess what happens if we refresh? I don't know. Yeah, really it's yes.
Are you changing the state within the store? Or probably the biggest issue I would have is communicating with the server,
Yeah.
not the store. So,
I don't have a great solution, I guess, for that.
okay.
Good question.
No questions?
Sorry, I saw you 2 times ago. Sorry, I keep forgetting. Yeah.
This may be a dumb question given my lack of knowledge of Redux, but when you talk about replaying actions, sort of you demoed it as like a nice development feature. Are there any like user-facing features where replaying actions could provide some benefit for a user of the application?
I guess it's kind of like the command pattern, I guess, right, to some degree, where it's like if you wanted to like, say you had Paint, you know, Microsoft Paint, and you wanted to like ... right, you could undo those actions conceivably by understanding like what was the history of that or different kind of things. So I think maybe make certain actions easier to do, to like undo or whatever. That's really is one kind of common use case, I guess.
One thing that is user is I've seen people talk about they build a bug reporting tool. So as soon as you see something you don't like in the interface, you click a button and it zips up all the state, all the action histories. And then in your bug report, you can actually just play and see exactly what happened to the state.
That's super
It's
cool.
not really user-facing.
Especially if you put like timestamps or like diffs from the initial, you can actually see like almost like how long it took them to do certain things. Like, oh yeah, you would have seen this because they waited 3 seconds before they did this, and this, you know, UI component wasn't done refreshing or whatever, that kind of thing. That's a good point. Yeah, sorry.
Roughly how many containers?
Let's see. So components, looks like 10. And some of these are just kind of like, you know, wrappers like this. This user loading was kind of what you see when it's like loading your information, just a spinner. This is all like material UI stuff. The steps is kind of what's rendered at the top of the page. It's kind of like what step are you on, essentially. And then each of these steps like has information about a specific, like this is how you render the step. So there's just like a subcomponent. We have kind of a container, which is like the root. This is kind of dealing with like how do we initialize certain things and you know, like if we have a token, we want to make sure that we're not logged in, things like that. There's a layout, which is just kind of like, how do we just kind of display, you know, like the app bar and kind of things like that. So this is kind of like the, almost like if you're familiar with Rails, like the app views, you know, or app views layouts, whatever, kind of thing. And then just a bunch of views, pretty much one per screen is how we did it. So it's kind of like you have your top level component or components, and then you have kind of your view, and then your view has many or, you know, one to many kind of like components on it. Sure. So let's go. Maybe this is a good one. This is the authentication view. So we have a bunch of stuff that we're importing here. So this is a React thing, prop types. So it's kind of saying like, what are the properties that this view should know about or just generally be able to use? And then, you know, adding new user is a Boolean, and, you know, that sort of thing. And then fields are required to initialize this component. There is a handle submit. So when you go and say, okay, I'm gonna actually, yeah, it's me or whatever. I think, let's see if I can find this page. Maybe that'll help also. So when you say, yep, it's me, this is what it will fire. So first we make sure that we don't actually submit it because we want to do our own kind of thing. And then we're gonna, you know, take all the values that we have on our form and actually like dispatch this create user action. So if we go to actions user, no, okay, I guess it'd be create user. So it'll dispatch this create user with these fields. Sorry, I'm used to splitting in a side window, but so it'll kind of take all these fields that we have given here. Some of these are, so this is create. Okay, so if we're adding a new user, then we'll do create user. So let's just do post authentication. I think that'd be a little easier. Let's see. So we have a birth date, SSN last four, and onboarding ID. And then what we'll do is we'll just say this thing is in progress, and then we'll post all these parameters to this endpoint. The endpoint knows, okay, I know what to do with these, and I'll give you either a success or, let's see, a success or a failure. I don't know where the success is. There it is, okay. It's down there a bit. So we're just handling various different errors that may happen with certain things. Like maybe our server's down, maybe we had a 500, maybe we had a 400, you know, so just different kind of error handling here. This is all in the action.
Okay, so you guys seem to have a lot of views, one container and several dozen. Were any of you guys concerned whether or not which component was hooked up to the store? Do you guys make a distinction or any kind of golden rule that says, you know, so-and-so should be talking to the store, and the other ones are?
I think that's, so are you saying, there's a lot of ways to maybe parse, are you saying like, are you worried about like performance kind of things, or like who can like modify the data, or, because I think it should be like,
had a little section where it said separate your components to containers.
Is it the map state that prompts
Yeah. You know, your containers would use those. You guys.
I think so. Well, I don't know. At least with what you're saying specifically about the map state the props, I think that in a different view we were using this somewhere. I think maybe in this kind of thing. So we're just saying, in this case, we're passing in the user, and that's the state, the global states user essentially. This is in a different view.
So your views are where it's going. I think it's containers that are the ones that are aware of the store.
Yeah, we're not calling, I don't think we're calling get state directly in a lot of these. We're just kind of saying, like, again, this is where I'm probably the fuzziest. So this is probably,
You map your states with all your.
I think so. I think we use that like provider kind of block. And so I think everything implicitly or explicitly, I'm not sure which, knows about the store and can kind of like dig into there. Now, nothing can really modify it because you have to have an action to modify that. You have to fire an action. So they're all just kind of like one-way data flow, store to the view. And so basically you just kind of need to know like, where do I need to plug into or dig into to kind of get the information that I need to get, essentially. Yeah. I don't think so. I think it's, yeah. I think so, yeah. So do you want to kind of dig in more to this specific file or? Okay, cool. Sorry, there's a lot of hands raised. Sorry if I did not answer effectively.
Any more questions? All right, thanks, sir.
Cool, thanks.